This episode is brought to you by our patreon.com subscribers. If you would like to help support the Historians at the Movies podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians at the movies. Now on with the show. Hey everybody, this is Jason, your host and creator here at Historians at the Movies podcast, where every week for the last 2 years, we've been bringing you movies and the histories behind them. And this week, we are on break. For the next few weeks, we're going to be coming back with new episodes in late January or early February 2025. So for the next few weeks, we're going to be giving you some of our favorite episodes from our early days in the pod. So this week, we're talking with Annette Gordon-Reed and Craig Bruce Smith about Die Hard, the classic film. And yeah, we can talk about the Christmas movie thing, but actually this conversation is a lot more about, is this the consummate 80s film? We're going to see in this movie, as our discussions about this, about the anxieties expressed in the 1980s over Japanese capitalism, America's place in the world, terrorism, all this kind of stuff, and the rise of a new kind of action star in Bruce Willis. So this is one of our very first episodes we ever did. It's one I'm very proud of because we got two absolute rock stars in Annette and Craig to be on the pod. They're two of my favorite people in the profession. And if you haven't had a chance to hear this pod, it's a lot of fun. So sit back and relax because Die Hard is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Tonight, we were talking to two of my favorite historians that you're possibly going to find. I just learn from them every single day, and I'm so stoked that we're here to talk about something very related to early American history, which is Die Hard. Annette Gordon-Reed is the Carl M. Loeb University professor at Harvard. She's won 16 book prizes, including the Pulitzer Prize in History in 2009 and the National Book Award in 2008 for The Hemingses of Monticello, An American Family. She's written about, looks like, 75 books, has won roughly double that in awards. And it's more awards than I can even shake a stick at. So you Google it. I like reading the amount of awards Annette has won was more than all the books I read for comps. She was elected as a member of the American Philosophical Society in 2019. And the thing that I think is the coolest thing in the world is that she has an elementary school named after her. I think like every time I see you tweeting about this, I love it. It makes me so happy. I think it's the coolest thing. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine how awesome that is. And our other guest tonight is a returning member to the Historians of the Movies podcast, our first 3-time guest host. It's Craig Bruce Smith back again.
You haven't aired any of the episodes yet.
Well, I know. That's the awesome part. This will actually be the first episode that you'll be in that's released. And then we got other ones that you'll come on. So for folks who haven't heard, Craig's going to be in the Predator episode and then also the Patriot episode. So really what we go to with Craig are the movies that are very historically accurate, have a lot of hard-hitting facts, a lot like we're going here with HATM. Craig, you have a disclaimer to tell us. What is that disclaimer tonight?
Yeah, my disclaimer is my views represent mine alone and certainly not those of Hans Gruber or, Liberté de Quebec or any other organization.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's just kick it off. I got one big question for both of you. Coke or Pepsi?
Well, you know what I'm going to say. I like both of them. It depends on my mood. Sometimes I feel like a Pepsi and sometimes I feel like a Coke. But I always feel like a Dr. Pepper.
Yeah. That was where I was queuing you up for. So every time I go for
I'm from Texas. I have to do Dr. Pepper.
I was in Texas like a few weeks ago. Like I was drinking Dr. Pepper. I was like, here, Annette, this is my ode to you. And then when I went to Maine, I was like, I ain't doing this for you, Heather. No, not at all. I'm both so glad, like, people are going to be asking me because all three of us actually focus our work on early American history, and we're not talking about early American history at all tonight. Why are we talking about Die Hard?
Well, this pairing makes literally no sense if you think about it. But deeper, again, I think we've been talking about Die Hard on Twitter for what, like 3-4 years now?
Yeah, it's a good while.
It's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, if I recall correctly, and one of the two of you can correct me, it was Joanne Freeman talking about how she'd never seen Die Hard, and then we all basically bullied her. And to my knowledge, she has still not seen it.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
if she has, I don't recall her mentioning it.
Well, we'll get her takes on it because she's queued up to do an episode as well, and she hasn't picked out the movie. So I'm like, if you watched it, I should make her watch Die Hard 2 is probably what I'll ask her to do. Or maybe Under Siege or any number of movies, because I do want to talk about this later on, which is like the amount of Die Hard Die Hard in a fill in the blank kind of things, because there's some real implications from this film.
And I'm going to say something controversial later, that one of those may in fact be better than the original.
Ooh.
Oh, you think so? Wow.
I think there is one that could contend, but we'll save it for later. That's a teaser.
All right. Well, all right. So this film, like, we come up, and of course, there's no surprise here why we're doing this film right now and why it's going to be released just ahead of Christmas, because this is the big question. Everybody's like, is this? And I don't even know that people actually ask this question anymore. In all seriousness, I don't know that
in serious circles.
Debate. So let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. Both of you are esteemed professors of American history, people with PhDs, learned scholars of the world. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Let's get this out of the way right now.
Yes, 100%.
Yes, it's a Christmas movie. There's Christmas all throughout it, because the music, the background music, they have snippets of things that are Christmas related songs. There's a Santa Claus. There's the spirit of the moment, a notion of family. That's a part of it, and coming together for family at difficult times. No, it's definitely a Christmas movie.
I think that's right. It's also, the way I look at it, Christmas is central to the plot. You couldn't just put this movie on any other day. It makes sense with the Christmas party. It makes sense why there's no one else in the building. If you made it any other day, it doesn't hit the same. Unlike something like Lethal Weapon, which is set at Christmas, but in my opinion, it doesn't really add anything aside from, you get to see Riggs and Murtaugh with the Santa Claus in the background.
All right, we've assigned this film. Definitely a Christmas movie. Anyone who disagrees immediately fails our courses.
Well, Bruce Willis disagrees. He says it's not a Christmas film. He does.
What was the basis of it?
He made a statement about a year ago, and he adamantly said it is not a Christmas movie. But 20th Century Fox, for the 30th anniversary, called it the greatest Christmas movie. So there's dispute.
Go with the studio.
Yeah, I'm going to go with. In fact, I'm just going to go with my own completely unbiased, unfiltered opinion, which is, of course, unquestioned. Which is absolutely not only a Christmas movie, but the single greatest Christmas film of all time. I mean, we're not talking A Christmas Story here on HATM, so it's got to be Die Hard.
I'd push back if is it the greatest Christmas movie. I think there's some classics that could give it a run for its money, but it is certainly the best. I think Miracle on 34th Street is probably the greatest Christmas movie for message, for tone.
Annette, what do you feel like?
I think that would be a sort of a new classic for me. Would be Elf, which I had not paid very much attention to, but that I see it now. It's the kind of movie that I could see different generations of people glomming onto and finding reasons to like it. So it's the father learns the lesson about the importance of family, the sweetness and of Elf, and so I think that's a good Christmas. But Miracle 34th Street is a great Christmas movie, and then It's a Wonderful Life is a great Christmas movie. We see it all the time and we take it for granted, but when I haven't seen it for a while and I look at it, it's a great idea to think about what you mean in people's lives, and you don't think about how what you're doing is contributing to the society that you're in and the community that you're in, the family that you're in. So that's a good Christmas message, because people are kind of down. I mean, Christmas is a happy, unhappy time. And so movies that are able to tap into that it's not all sweetness and light, I think, for me are the best kinds of Christmas movies.
That's why I really like another new one, The Holiday, with Cameron Diaz and Kate Winslet and Jude.
I haven't seen that.
I think that's another. It's excellent, and they're actually just announced they're doing Holiday 2 with the original cast.
I'm all in on that. I actually love that film, and you've got.
I have to take a look at it. I haven't seen it.
Oh my gosh, you've got Eli Wallach is in that film. classic.
But I'd argue Jack Black is by far the best playing it like a serious dramatic role. I think he steals it.
He's really good in that, and he's really good.
No, I'll take a
in
look
High
at it.
Fidelity. Oh, it's great. Not we've got another list to ask Joanne if she'll watch as well. We're like, all right, each HATM podcast will come up with yet another movie to ask Joanne to watch as well.
This is Jason. It's getting blah blah blah. We haven't even shot anyone yet.
All right, we'll get into the murder. I did want to say this one thing, and here's the thing that Annette, you kind of brought up just a moment ago, which is Elf, right? You said is one of those new classics, and it's interesting because Christmas movies are a genre of their own, right? And it feels like with both Christmas movies and Christmas music, there's like a hierarchy, a pantheon of films, and Elf seems like it has made that leap into that level of It's a Wonderful Life, these required movies that you watch this time of year. Before we shoot anyone, before anyone else gets shot, I do have to know
before we shoot anyone.
Oh, we're people are going to get shot here. Well, ask who's your favorite historical figure to get shot. Favorite Christmas song? What do you got?
I like God Rest Ye Gentlemen because I love the Bare Naked Ladies Sarah McLachlan version from, was it like the late 90s?
My favorite.
And yeah, that's probably my favorite.
I don't think it's the best Christmas song, but I would say my favorite Christmas song is We Three Kings. And it was a song that was written and performed first at a school where my kids went for 12 or 13 years. So I had to hear that every single year with the kids singing it. So I associate it with my children, from kindergarten through senior year, is that particular song. So it's a sentimental thing.
No, both of those are outstanding choices. And as long as neither of you were going to say like the John Lennon song, which is my least favorite maybe song ever. Was it? Do They Know It's Christmas? Is that the one? I couldn't stand it. Speaking of people who got shot.
No, do they know? I tweeted about this the other day. Do They Know It's Christmas? That's the Bob Geldof song that they did for Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And they did. And I was saying the first part of that song is horrific. The chorus is classic. I really wish somebody would go back and write another song to sort of go with that chorus. Because the first part of it, at night, tonight, thank God it's them and not you. I mean, it's like,
tone down.
What? He was like, are you kidding me?
That's the Bono line.
I know. It's like, Get out of here, people. But the chorus, Feed the World, Let Them Know It's Good. I mean, I think, and they do the harmony is wonderful, but it belongs in a different song, not that first part of it.
We are making some very significant historical headway right off the bat tonight, figuring out best Christmas songs. Best Christmas movie. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Worst Christmas songs.
Worst Christmas songs, right? Worst Christmas podcast. Wait, that's not right. So let's jump into this. All three of us love Die Hard. Why do we love this movie?
I think the fact that it is this is for me as a kid growing up, I could argue that this was in fact a Christmas movie. So I could get an action movie in the Christmas movie rotation with. You couldn't argue against it. So I think that's part of it. It's there's a lot of sweetness and there's a lot of, sentiment in a lot of the Christmas movies. Again, my wife and I probably watch every Hallmark movie or Netflix movie about a secret prince in a castle or whatever. It's nice to show that you love a person by throwing a terrorist off a roof of a building.
That works. I think I like, Bruce Willis. Yeah. I mean, he is at the height of his Bruce Willisness at that point, the kind of perpetual smirk. America versus Europe. America, the kind of cowboy, the guy who comes there just with a gun, and the Europeans show up, with all their great German efficiency, and he manages to thwart all of that. It's sort of an American fantasy about what the country is supposed to be like. We're the people who don't seem to be taking anything seriously, but are deadly serious and deadly effective in the midst of, in the face of this efficiency. They have it all planned out, and he just wrecks the whole thing while he's, running around with, wisecracking. I mean, the wisecracking American, that is a part of movies and a part of our image from the very get-go. Not serious, but actually accomplishing things by being sort of light about it, in the midst of something that's really serious. So between him And the villains on the other side are great. Alan Rickman, the two of them are just perfect in their roles. And so when you have, with the material and actors and actresses who are just really totally into the parts and playing it, I just think it works at all levels. It's funny and horrifying at the same time.
I'm still always astounded that this is Alan Rickman's first Hollywood movie. Mm-hmm. So you could argue his first movie is his iconic role, and it doesn't get any better for him.
No, it doesn't, right? Like, this is really...
So nice they do it twice.
Right? When did you come to this? Like, when did you see this film for the first time? I want to place your emotion, your relationship to this movie in context over, say, the past 30 some odd years. When did you first see this film? Do you recall when it was that you first? Did you see this in the theater? Did you see it on HBO?
Well, I'm older than you guys. I saw it when it came out. I saw it in a movie theater, and so it was the whole experience of seeing it with other people and seeing the reaction of a crowd. I still think that there's nothing like watching movies with people. And one of these days we may actually go back to that. But I saw it I saw it when it came out. So that was my first experience with it.
I saw it shortly after it came out, as the viewers or the listeners will learn in future episodes. I had an older cousin that didn't abide by any sort of ratings on movies. So I probably saw it right after it came out on video. So, however long that took is when I saw it. So I should not have seen it, but I did. And I loved it largely because, again, I was watching Schwarzenegger movies and Stallone movies that, anything I can get my hands on. So it was exactly in my genre for a young boy. And, the fact that I wasn't supposed to be seeing it probably made it better.
Oh, yeah. It's the forbidden nature of it.
Were you a fan of action movies in general? What drew you to this film? Because at the time when you went to go see it, was the next thing at the movie that was coming out? Do you recall?
Well, as my husband and I always went to the movies on the weekends. And so whatever was out there, we went to see. It was a time when they were putting out, when Schwarzenegger was putting out movies with the body count movies, where it was a similar kind of thing where you kill 1,000 people and then make a joke about it or whatever. It was like a cartoon come to life. But we went to see it because that's what we did. What's out now. And we were pretty eclectic in our taste. We watched, foreign films and whatever struck our fancy at the time. And, I didn't, Bruce Willis, I was not necessarily a fan of his. I didn't dislike him. He was just, a person. We went to see it because we'd heard that it was good and it was doing well. And so we went out.
Yeah, because originally they didn't even have him on the movie poster, if my historical research is correct.
It's the building.
Yeah, it was, right? I mean, it was kind of a low-key, come through the side door kind of thing with Bruce Willis, because it was really, in a lot of ways, this film invents Bruce Willis as an action star.
It's also think about how many people passed on it. So, like, Frank Sinatra was attached to this.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. I mean, it's like, my goodness.
Clint Eastwood, Robert De Niro, apparently Jack Lemmon tried to get a part. I have no idea what that even
I can't imagine what that looks like.
What would he have been? I mean, I can't imagine what that's.
Hans Gruber, obviously.
Arnold was attached to it and turned it down. And there's a whole sort of rumor that goes along with that now about there's a rumor that this was actually supposed to be Commando 2. Mm-hmm. Through the miracle of Twitter, though, I actually talked to the writer of both Commando and Die Hard, Steven D'Souza, and he informed me that no, it is not. His script for Commando 2 was John Matrix breaking into a building held by like terrorists. So it's a completely different movie.
Well, let's talk then a little bit then, because I'd like to get both of your historical thoughts on this. Why this movie is so much different than, say, and Annette, you kind of alluded to this a bit earlier. Why is this movie and why is this character of John McClane so much different than, say, the Stallone, the Schwarzeneggers? Why is this movie different coming out in 88 than what was coming out, say, in just earlier, 85, 86, 84? And so forth. This is a radically different film than Annette, what you referred to as the body count films. Why is this movie different?
There's a body count, but he has a wife and children and family, and you know him through the wife. The scene where he comes in and he's, my name's not good enough for you or whatever. And then when she leaves, he goes into the bathroom and says, what a jerk. That was great. He's a very human character. So you feel when he's in peril, you really feel it. He's going to come out okay. But because he's been made vulnerable from the very beginning, I think you're with him in a way that you're not with the Schwarzenegger characters, which we like those movies too, but he's not like real. Those things are much more cartoonish, and they don't really give you a character who has an inner life. We know that this guy is hurting in a way, and he's out there to try to salvage his family, and this weird thing happens, and he has to fight for his family, essentially. And so I think it's the connection to a human character, someone that you can relate to, that lifts it above just the normal body count kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's Bruce Willis is supposed to be the everyman. He's a New York cop, blue collar job. I come from a family of New York cops. So it's like, this is your dad. This is your uncle. The audience, you could be Bruce Willis. You could not be Arnold. And Arnold is like the pinnacle. Your average person can't be him. And he plays
Mr. the Universe, Mr. World, yeah.
Yeah, you can't be him. You could be Willis. And you could, theoretically, you could find yourself in a similar predicament. I don't know how you do, but he's not looking for it. This just comes to him. He's a regular guy.
You have to use your wits to get out of it. It's not just brawn or whatever. And it's his smarts, his street smarts, to combat this, as I was saying before, this kind of efficient German efficiency that gets all wrecked because of him.
And this is where, Jason, I set you up to talk about your thesis between the Odysseus and Achilles model, because I do think it really is. I still ponder this 5 years later.
Yeah, well, I had always kind of seen this character of John McClane. As Annette, you were just saying, this guy's really kind of got to outwit the bad guys. He's not superhuman like Achilles, like the Schwarzenegger and Stallone guys. And what gets McClane in trouble? His hubris. He's a bit of a cocky guy at times. He definitely, we all know he can run his mouth, but he's definitely the guy who is not overwhelming the bad guys by force. It's an action film, but it's very much an intellectual film. This guy is constantly, MacGyvering his way through the situation, whether it is, I'm thinking right now about, jumping off that amazing shot. And this film, I want to talk about how well this film has so many great shots.
Oh yeah.
But when he has to jump off the building with the fire hose attached to him, and later on when he's fighting up against Hans and he's got the gun taped to him, he's always out maneuvering. The thing is, Gruber's supposed to be this great intellectual guy who is confused everybody. He's not a terrorist, right? He's a bank robber. That's what he's there to do, and he's outsmarted everybody. And the only guy who can outsmart him is this kind of downtrodden dude from New York who looks like anybody else, like Greg was saying. So I've always seen this as the turn from saying the superhuman guys in the 1980s of the Schwarzenegger, Stallone, into a lesser effect, maybe Lundgren and Van Damme motifs into these less physically imposing guys. And you start to see this in the Die Hard knockoffs, guys like Seagal and other folks who are not the human specimen, right? Who are just smart. They're technically proficient, but out with the bad guys.
But part of it is too, it helps keep down box office costs, because you don't have to get Arnold for $20 million. You could go get whatever TV star, slap him in something, and there you go. You just made yourself an action star from the star of Moonlighting.
Have a kind of love story in a way, a love interest, a family interest, something humanizing, and it sort of completes it for people.
I think one of the interesting things, Annette, you brought this up, was like whenever we first see Holly McClane, the first thing she tells us is that John McClane is not a good husband. She's in the process of leaving this guy, or they're separated. It's not a good thing. This guy is not a completely. First time we see Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, he's literally feeding deer out of the palm of his hand with his daughter, right? And then this guy we've got, Yeah, okay. We're gonna root for him. We're gonna fall for John McClane. But goodness,
Arnold's in a bad marriage and Raw Deal. You forget
I
about
forgot
that.
about Raw Deal. I
Yeah.
don't care about Raw Deal. Let me ask you this: putting on your historical hats for a moment, what does this movie tell us about the 1980s? This film was scripted in the mid 80s, shot in 87, released in 88. When we look at this movie as an artifact of the time, what parts of this film date this movie to its era?
The Japanese are going to take over the world. The Japanese corporate, we were in the middle of all of that. There was such fear about Japan. Boy, that turned out to be, talking about historians, people making predictions, that turned out not to be the case. I think the Japanese terrorists, the idea of terrorists kidnapping people, hijacking, all that kind of stuff for a particular cause, which seems to have kind of gone away now. I mean, now that people blow themselves up or have other ways of making their complaints known, that's gone by the wayside. So I think the Japanese story and the notion of them as that he would think of making themselves terrorists, something that would be completely recognizable to people. We're holding these people for the People's Republic or whatever until you do what we want, which isn't really, I think young people looking at this today would find that it's like watching, Back to the Future and the Libyans, when he's like the Libyans, you think, now the Libyans, what are you talking about? I think those two things stick out to me. Also the question about women, the women's role, and it's kind of a cop out in the end when she says, she takes his name back, but that was a big deal at that time. The idea of a woman keeping her name as opposed to taking her husband. And that was supposed to signal what a problem right there, what kind of problem was in their marriage. So I think the gender story, Japanese and terrorists as kidnapping people and holding them hostage for their particular aims, like Patty Hearst, it comes off of that stuff.
I think that's exactly right. And for predictions, there was a book that came out in 1991 by George Friedman called The Next War. And it was about how the next U.S. war would be with Japan. And so they sort of predict, there you have these big, names, these big flashy books that the next war is coming with Japan. If you think about, like book/movies or American Psycho, they'll reference things like the Japanese will own this country before the end of the decade. And then Pat Bateman goes, they will not.
Yeah. Rockefeller Center, they're buying all of these things.
Mm-hmm. I think that's 100% fitting. The idea of, they make, there's those Pearl Harbor jokes. We didn't get you with Pearl Harbor, sort of the idea of this is some sort of building conflict between the U.S. and Japan. And then the idea, I think you're absolutely right about terrorists and, that one scene where Gruber's trying to like get his brothers and sisters in arms freed from with the New Provo Front, Liberté de Quebec, and Asian Dawn.
Yeah.
Who of course I read about in Time magazine. They're all based on real groups. The Red Army faction, was it the Baader Meinhof in Germany? The New Provos are, that was a play on provisional IRA. The Asian Dawn was a play on the was it the Tamil Tigers, who were a revolutionary nationalist group in Sri Lanka. So there's real historical grounding here, and an audience who was not, young me would have understood that in the 80s. But even young me knew, there was stuff like that going on.
And it wouldn't be, now it'd be completely different.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't resonate in the same way because you don't have those groups out there doing that kind of thing.
But it's also you get the excesses of the 80s. I mean, Gruber and Takagi are talking about bespoke Savile Row suits. Mm-hmm. The tailor they mentioned does not exist. Mm-hmm. And name dropping. Well, that's where Arafat gets his.
Suits,
the idea that you've got Holly gets a Rolex. The symbol of 80s, mm-hmm. status. Ellis is doing coke.
Major amounts of coke. He is such an 80s character.
That Ellis character is kind of ubiquitous.
You could throw him in Wall Street or whatever.
Yeah.
I was at a law firm in the 80s, and there were people. Really, it's like I walked down to Wall Street, and it was an open air, essentially drug mart, and eventually that's when they had to institute testing because all those people were just, trying to stay awake all night, doing things on the street. So he is familiar. He's people that I know, people that we would be really very much a part of the 80s. And the kind of superficial, this thing I can make a deal about anything. It's like, you don't have any idea who you're dealing with, what's going on here. He just thinks that the kind of facile deal making capacity could be put in any setting, and you see what ends up happening to him.
But it's also, I think you're right. We've talked about family values. You could see a strain on them that was, would have been more common in the 80s than it would have been in the 70s or the 60s or even the 90s. You're also seeing things, there are random lines in there that just you wouldn't have even in the 90s, where Holly Gennaro / McLean's secretary says, who's pregnant, says, well, do you think the baby can have one drink? And then Holly says, that baby's ready to 10 bar.
Yeah.
Stuff that even a few years later you wouldn't have. So it's very much grounded in a moment. Again, the jokes that are made are acceptable for that moment. That even move it forward a little bit.
In California, the poking fun at California. I guess nobody ever stops poking fun at California, but the guy who comes up and kisses him, or when he gets off the airplane and sees the blonde, runs over and greets her boyfriend, and it's like, this is California.
Is California proto Florida? Because it seems like Florida has taken on that new thing where we've got Florida Man. This is a different place. One of the things I've noticed actually in watching some of these films that we've been doing for HATM, both for the Sunday night thing and also for the pod, were little things I'm picking up on that I'd kind of forgotten about. And I kind of wonder about your own relationships when you talk about, the 80s with, say, your students or anything like that. Two words I had completely forgotten about: West Germany, West Berlin. Mm-hmm. And I was just in Europe recently, and like getting to visit, Prague and see, a country that had been underneath the shadow of the Soviet Union. And those memories are still very real and very powerful today. And I'm kind of wondering, do you have, when you talk to students, is there any kind of like memory? Because this is well past this is well before the births of many of our students today, especially the early college students. Is there any kind of underlying understanding of Europe or this space in the late Cold War? Do your students have any kind of understanding of that coming into your classes?
I mean, I remember when the wall came down. That was one of my, more formative memories as a young person. I had the little, when they sold the, your pet rock of the Berlin Wall, in your little commemorative pouch. I had one of those. So I distinctly remember it, but I do think you're right that it is so far removed now from the average student. But I think it may be coming back again. The unfortunate situation, the invasion of Ukraine, I think is bringing back some of this Cold War sentiment that we really haven't had in a long time. But the idea of your average student thinking about a divided Germany, probably not.
No, I mean, I don't have any indication that they are thinking about this because it's so far away, removed from their experiences. But I think you're right, Craig. What's happened recently with the war, it's made people think about that area, that space. But you got to remember, we have politicians who are, I would sort of wonder, it would be if you had people from the 80s come back and hear some of these people, praising Putin and being on his side. I don't know what young people, it's hard to convey to them just how strange that is to somebody of my age who grew up the way I grew up, to think that this ex-KGB person, I mean, what is going on here? If Reagan were to come back and, listen to this and think, what the heck is going on? So it's far removed from their world, and so much weird stuff is happening that there's it's difficult. It would be difficult for them to process a time when they were considered to be mortal enemies, someone like Putin.
Yeah, I know when I teach the Cold War, I'll show the Kennedy-Nixon debate, and I always laugh. They start, it's that debate starts, the first, televised one starts off, let's talk domestic politics, and then Nixon and Kennedy both go off on the Soviet Union for 20 minutes. And they're pretty much saying the same thing about the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And it's just the point that everyone could agree, Soviets, bad. You cannot be soft on the Soviets, and I think that is something that you may not, that has been lost in this post Cold War moment.
Well, you're saying that too, and also that debate is actually closer to the production of Die Hard than we are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
which blows my mind just sitting here talking about it, because I watched it. It's actually one of my 14-year-old son's favorite films. I think the film holds up really well on film just because it's so well shot, so well acted. But I do want to ask, through the power of our vast historical knowledge, how does this movie change if it's produced today? What's different about Die Hard in 2022 versus, say, 1988?
Well, they're probably not West German terrorists from. It probably is altered. If you made it today, maybe we're back to the Russians. If it was made, depending on the decade, maybe you have an Al Qaeda-esque group. I'm thinking of another Bruce Willis movie, the 1998 The Siege. You could adapt it to the moment. But again, I think, like Annette said earlier, the tactics used or that are available the scale has changed. So it may not feel the same.
In the terrorists, I think you're right. The terrorists might be different. The villains would be different. I don't know about the gender stuff. I'd be interested to think about how Holly might be portrayed today, how that situation might be portrayed today, when it's the sort of happy ending there is when she ends up taking his name again, and he sort of proves himself as a man. And so she comes back to the fold. I mean, perhaps it wouldn't have changed, but I do wonder how people would respond to that today. What criticisms might they have?
The thing is, McClane, I don't think has to be played by a man. This could have been a female action lead if it came out today just as easily, because like you said, it's not about this, this look at my muscles, I'm Arnold. It's about thinking. It's about,
Yeah, but he's pretty macho guy though. I mean, he's not built up, but in the same way, I still think there's the
he's
cowboy.
Scrappy.
He's scrappy. Yeah. I don't know. You think a woman could, it would have the same impact?
I got a name for you.
I could think you could throw Charlize Theron in just about anything.
That's exactly who I'm thinking.
And she could pull it off.
Charlize Theron, absolutely. Maybe only her. I don't know. Maybe there's someone else, but she's Craig and I were just talking. I mean, just thinking the exact same person. She has, we're in this new age now of action films, which are traditionally a very masculine dominated genre, right? And yet, who is the one woman they continue to go to into these films? And it's Charlize Theron. We've seen her stand up against Vin Diesel and all that in the Fast and Furious films. She was far and away the best part of the Mad Max film that came out recently. I think that she really there was the Netflix film that came out a couple years ago. Craig, help me out. I can't remember the name of it. The Old Guard. The Old Guard.
Oh,
she's terrific.
But I'd argue Atomic Blonde is arguably the best action movie of the past 10 years. I would argue that.
Yeah.
Well, what would her backstory be, though? Because I think the backstory here is important. I think maybe saving her husband,
could be.
Yeah.
I mean, she could, right? I mean, what if you inverse the roles, right? Where you've got the husband as the executive or something like that. And then she is a tough cop out of New York or some other place, or Joburg or some, for Charlize.
Yeah. Charlize, yeah.
Yeah. Let her roll with it. I think it might work, but I also don't think that the character does the character work? I think the character could also work, if you had African-American leads or, people of color. Does John McClane have to be a white man is my question.
I think the point is he's a stand-in for anyone.
Okay.
Right. That's what I took from it. I mean, he's a cop. Yeah. He knows how to use a gun. He has a gun, but this isn't, special forces training.
Right. Yeah.
Like
so
Rambo
Will Smith before the Oscars could be,
that's literally who I was thinking about in that.
Because you could see it, because he, not only now, but I mean, if a young Will Smith at that time period, because he would do the wisecracking. He's physically adept, but he's not Schwarzenegger. So yeah.
Bad Boys era Will Smith could have done it.
I think exactly Will Smith is. It's funny that you guys were both reading my minds here, because I think Will Smith is the exact person who has the physical strength, but also has the comedic chops and frankly acting chops. He's a good actor to pull off the role as well, because you need the guy who can really kind of, when Schwarzenegger or Stallone deliver the one-liners, it's a single line, right? But the best part of Die Hard, the most famous scene in it is him in the air duct, right, with the lighter, delivering that, come out and we'll have a few laughs.
If you think about it, most of the movie for Willis is like one long soliloquy where he's just talking to himself.
Yeah. And what about the relationship between him and the cops? I mean, I think the portrayal of, that might be something that would change. Would the FBI be portrayed as such dimwits today? Maybe.
I sure hope so. Probably FBI. It's you either
probably.
You have. Okay. For instance, I was just watching this when I was watching Thelma and Louise. You have either the local cops are the talented guys and the FBI are the numbskulls, or the local cops are the good old boys and the FBI is smart and they've got to come in and fix things. Kind of like maybe, or some version that might be in the U.S. Marshals Harrison Ford film,
The Fugitive.
Thank you, right? Where you've got but I mean, it's actually one of the best part of that film. Maybe one of the best parts of that film is that relationship that goes between, Bruce Willis and Al, right? Going back and forth
before he moves to the Chicago PD.
Sitcom. Reginald VelJohnson did okay on that, though.
Yeah, he did.
That's also an unexpected thing too. Another human relationship that sets him apart from the other people that you were mentioning, the kind of the body count things, because he's making a human connection as well.
Well, my hot take is going to be that's the great love of John McClane's life is actually Al down there. I mean, I love that last when they see each other and they just know, right? Because McClane doesn't get through this film alive without his guy down there coaching him through it and keeping him sane. Because he's got the entire world against him, including the numbskulls at the FBI, the LAPD, so forth. And you've got this great guy who's like, hey, I'll get you through this.
And then he has his moment of redemption at the end.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the most satisfying endings.
And it deals with, a very, very real phenomenon of, and I remember this is good. Jason, you probably remember this too, when toy guns started coming out with the red tips.
Absolutely.
And, or, the different colors because of these accidental shootings. And so that's something that would have resonated with an 80s crowd. And I know I distinctly remember that as a kid, because that's something, my parents would always talk about, that makes, never play with a gun, a toy gun that looked too real or that wasn't marked with some crazy color.
Well, that gets addressed in the Lethal Weapon series.
Yeah.
We spoke about this a little bit earlier. I want to ask you about the legacy of this film, because we all know at this point in time, Die Hard on a blank becomes a film trope. Yep. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are as far as the overlasting legacy of this film. Craig, you said you've got a hot take on this. What does this movie mean to both film history, or the way that we look at action movies, or the way we look at the United States versus the world? How does this movie change the way that we look at movies in the world after it?
I think you're very much playing with the blue collar versus white collar thing. So Gruber is this sort of suave, refined. He's wearing his bespoke suits. He's got his Cartier watch on. It's all the flash of, the Rolex, but more refined. He's able to speak languages, different accents. So it's the white collar, blue collar thing, the everyman versus something else, right? Whether it's European, whether it's educated, whether it's, whatever you want it to be. Because you could say he's against the FBI too in some way. I think the legacy is you can replicate this. This gave a formula where you could say, take scenario, Die Hard on a boat, Die Hard on a bus, Die Hard on whatever you want on a plane. And you could insert moderately believable but less expensive action star with generic bad guys with an accent. And you could make that movie. And they make it fairly successfully, and it would entertain people. If you took some of the scripts from the 80s, if you took Commando and could you make that without Arnold? I'd argue you couldn't. that the movie wouldn't work without someone of that type. But you could, swap in. It's Keanu Reeves. It's, whoever, it's Seagal. It's, Van Damme in a hockey rink. You could make it with pretty much anyone and replicate it. So I think that's it. And, if you're thinking like a Hollywood executive, you've got a formula to make money now. And that's why I think you see it so often. But I'd argue by the time we get to Die Hard with a Vengeance, that's innovative again in a new way. And it sparks a new type of action movie as well. I think Die Hard 1 absolutely does, but it's pretty much replicated in a lot of ways in Die Hard 2. But Die Hard 3 is something different. And then I like to pretend 4 and 5 did not happen.
Oh, well, it's a legacy. This may be something, I was just thinking that the Bruce Willis character in the 80s, it's about America triumphing in a way. And I wonder if we could do that today in the same way without, and this is something that all audiences, whatever their political persuasion, I think, went and cheered that. I think it was a time period where people were feeling, a little frightened in a sense because of the notion of the Japanese threat, that, as ridiculous as that seems now, with Japan as an economic power, we're still in the legacy of Vietnam and a notion of defeat. And here was an American guy triumphing, as I said, over, not the Vietnamese, but triumphing over Europe, of the old world, and using American pluck and ingenuity to do that. I think it was Buy America. We were concerned about jobs going overseas, all of this stuff. So there's a lot of, I think, politics that's tied up in John McClane in the presentation that, I don't know would hit in the same way today. But the legacy is right. The idea that it tells you how to do this type of movie, but it'll have a different resonance. This is made in America, Buy America, all this kind of stuff that, I'm an adult in the 80s during this time period, which was a big part of the discussion about how we were going to maintain our preeminence in the world.
But you still have, the Cold War aspect where, Hans Gruber expelled from the Volksfrei movement for being too radical.
Mm-hmm.
He's radical even for these, communist terrorists. This is, this before the wall came down. It's still, it hits in a different way. And, I think it has a long lasting legacy. I mean, you see it like the echoes of it everywhere. There's a cartoon that was called Bobby's World that had Howie Mandel in it. And one of the opening scenes of that was like this little kid, Bobby, doing the Die Hard jump, but he was like tied to his like teddy bear. So before I forget, here's my hot take.
Oh, hit us.
Okay.
I think most of the movies pale in comparison. Your Under Siege 2, Sudden Death, whatever. Speed, I think, is a good movie, but I think it's clearly Die Hard on a bus. The one I will give you that is pretty much, I will admit, it's Die Hard on a prison, on an island. But when you put Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage on that island with Ed Harris, it makes it a better movie. Mm-hmm. So I'd argue The Rock actually out Die Hard's Die Hard.
Well, it's hard to lose with those three.
Do you buy in on this idea that the Connery character is actually James Bond? Because I think it's a lot more fun.
It's more fun. You could poke holes in it, and I think one of them is the chances of Bond going to a Led Zeppelin concert when he's previously said he won't listen to the Beatles without wearing earmuffs. I don't buy, but it's a whole lot more fun if you this is an aging James Bond. I don't see any harm in it.
All right. Yeah. Well, I want to move on to maybe my second to last section here and ask you about two things. Of course, all three of us kind of focus in our work on the late 18th century, early 19th. So our historical works may be a little removed from 1988. But I want to ask you, because this is historians of the movies, maybe if you might be able to give to us a particular book that's influenced your work, and then maybe transition to a film that you also think maybe might encapsulate the 80s. So maybe you might be able to pivot back and forth between centuries and formats, if you will.
I mean, a book about the 1980s that has influenced my work on George Washington. I mean, you got all sorts of early American scholarship that's coming out in the 80s. But what I want to throw out there, I think it's the second part. I think is a little bit more fitting. Like one book I'm thinking is Paul was at Longmore's The Invention of George Washington that came out in the 80s. I mean, I think that certainly had a very real impact on my writing. But a book that I think encapsulates the 80s, book/film, I'm going to say it again. I think American Psycho encapsulates the 80s probably better than anything out there. And, you could see Ellis hanging out with Pat Bateman at Dorsia.
Absolutely.
And it makes perfect sense, perfect, continuity.
Well, when I think of something a movie that encapsulates the idea of the 80s, I would say Wall Street and Working Girl.
Oh, yeah.
Which is not the dress, the hair, the whole thing is just, the tennis shoes and suits, all of it, the look of it. That's what makes me think of, that time period. It resonates very, very well with it.
Although I will say the man of the decade is Arnold Schwarzenegger. No contest.
Well, don't you find it interesting that I asked you both to say a film that encapsulates the 80s? Of course, it's one movie, right? And we all of us immediately go to New York executives, capitalism, as defining, say, the 1980s. Any number of regions. Arkansas is not going to look like that in the 1980s, right? Or some other place, But I find it's interesting that, because my mind goes the exact same thing too. Maybe it's a cultural thing where I've been.
And I was living here in the 80s until that's, clams on the half shell and roller skates. Good times. That's it kind of dominated in a way, maybe not. Does New York? I don't know that it. I guess in television and so forth, it may. There shows set other places now, but at the time, it seemed to be. The focus was all on the city.
It was either New York or LA, right?
Yeah. And I'm from New York, so like all good New Yorkers, the universe actually revolves around New York. It's a proven fact. So that's where
you were in Arkansas, Jason?
Oh no. In 1988, I was an 11-year-old child in Western Kentucky. So we had just moved back up from Louisiana. So I grew up in
that's just like Manhattan.
It's very much like there's actually a big Apple Cafe in my hometown in Murray, Kentucky.
Like you were there.
Yeah, absolutely. Only you get bean rolls there. Like they serve Mexican food. Don't ask me about my hometown. There's a whole other podcast just waiting to understand Murray, Kentucky. So let me wrap this up by asking you maybe one final question, which is Die Hard a history movie?
Annette, I'll give you first crack on this because I have strong opinions.
Well, I think it's a history movie in the sense that, just as we discussed before, it invokes a particular time. You could look at that movie and there's so much about it that tells you what the 80s were about. Back to Japan, back to the corporate world, Ellis, just the struggle over women, a marriage and men and women, that kind of thing. So I would say, that there are movies that you could look at and it doesn't really, you can't say that it's of that moment. It doesn't give you anything about the culture of a place. But this movie does.
I think if you watch it today, it absolutely is a historical film, an artifact of the 1980s. I think that's true. I think if you watch it in 1988, though, it is not a history movie.
People are living in their time.
Yeah. And it's no hearkening back to yesteryear. You've got a few World War II references, but really not much beyond that. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say in 1988, this is not a history movie. Today it is.
It is.
Well, there you go. So we all agree Die Hard is both a Christmas movie and a history film.
In 2022.
Well, we're not going to go back in time and record this podcast. So in 2022, history film, Christmas movie, we're hitting all the heads.
Yeah. No. I think it's some of those other of the body count movies. If you were to see them now, they wouldn't really tell you much about the society, about the society, as much about the society as this place, as this movie does.
Oh, we're going to have to do Commando at some point in time, because that is the classic body count film, and break that one down, I think.
I think Commando can tell you a whole lot about what's going on in America in the 80s. Although,
If I'm thinking of it, yeah.
Although I always laugh. Rob Greene is called Commando, the height of human civilization.
I don't even know where it's coming from that, and I'll have to ask him about it. So, well, listen, Annette, Craig, thank you both so very, very much for being here tonight. I really do appreciate both you guys being here tonight, but also your continued support for this crazy little thing we've been doing for the last few years. I know you've both dropped in from time to time, and it's meant the world to me. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us.